welcome. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. And welcome to today's webinar, being hosted by Orinoco Tribune on alternative media outlets. And we are also streaming live on Facebook. The link is shared in the chat and it's also on Facebook. So please share the link with your friends and ask them to join. Thank you. So today we are celebrating 2.5-year anniversary of Orinoco Tribune, which started its journey in November 2018 with the aim to disseminating information from inside Venezuela with a Chavista perspective. Now, as we all know, the information war, or I should say the disinformation war against Venezuela is extreme, and it has succeeded in building a narrative that is suited to the interests of the US empire. And a lot of it is very different from the ground realities in Venezuela. So the Orinoco Tribune tries to tear apart this narrative and bring information which the mainstream media generally hides or distorts or presents as something else entirely. And of course, when the Orinoco Tribune does not inform only on Venezuela, it also informs on movements and situations and events happening around the world, especially those that the mainstream media refuse to touch, or if they do, they will distort or do something else with it. Now, thinking of today's webinar, which is titled Social Alternative Media Coordination, Cooperation, and Socialism. So in recent years, we have seen a huge boom in alternative media outlets, and a lot of these media outlets have anti-imperialist, anti-hegemonic, and socialist perspectives. And this thing is excellent in itself, but there are many times when one feels that there is a lot more competition among these outlets instead of cooperation. And this thing reduces the reach and the impact of these outlets, which they would otherwise have had they cooperated more. Moreover, in the present situation of the media warfare, it's very important that the alternative media coordinate and cooperate among themselves, especially because the mainstream media also do it to a very large extent. And this thing is very evident just by reading a few articles on a particular topic published in different mainstream media outlets, not just in the West, but also in their counterparts in the global South. So one can find a word, not just words, sentences, and even entire paragraphs that are strikingly similar in media outlets across languages. And this would not have been possible without some coordination. So in this situation, it's essential that alternative media outlets also coordinate among themselves so that our voices, the voices of the peoples of the world, do not get silenced or drowned by the mainstream media narratives. So today we have two excellent and well-known journalists, Camila Escalante and Ben Norton, who will discuss these issues and a lot more with the founder editor of Orinoco Tribune, Jesús Rodríguez-Espinoza. Now, of course, Camila and Ben are both very well known, but still one has to give a short information about them. So Camila Escalante is co-founder of Kawsachun News, which is based in Bolivia, and she is also very well known for her work with Telesur English. And Ben Norton is a journalist and writer with the Grayzone, and he also produces the podcast Moderate Rebels, which he co-hosts with the Grayzone editor, Max Blumenthal. And thanks a lot, Ben and Camila, for accepting the invitation and being here. And Jesús Rodríguez-Espinoza, who is the founder and editor of Orinoco Tribune, is an expert in international relations, Venezuelan politics, and communication. And he, for many years, served as the Consul General of Venezuela in Chicago. And prior to Orinoco Tribune, he was also one of the members of the founding team of the Venezuelan Spanish language news website, Aporea. So we'll also provide the links of all these outlets and everything else where to follow their work in the chat. Now just let me give a very brief outline of this webinar. The event will last for around 90 minutes, and it will begin with a panel discussion between the three panelists today, and it will be followed by a question and answer session. And please feel free to send your questions. If you are on Zoom, type them in the Q&A. And if you are in Facebook, please type them in the comments. We'll check as many questions as possible. and sending you a warm welcome again. And thanks a lot for joining. And now I will give this over to Jesus, if he is ready, Jesus.
Yes, thank you, Sahili, for the
Okay, very well.
Please, Camila, and then you can come up with your video. I want to thank Camila and the whole team for helping me organizing the webinar. We have Sahili Chaudhry, who is from India. We have Gabriel Martinez from Mexico and Steve Lala from Canada that has been helping me, and they are part of the Orinoco Tribune team. And we have been preparing this webinar with a lot of excitement to try to discuss something that is not usually too touched by the media, by us. So basically what I wanted to say, first of all, after acknowledging the team members, is of course thanking Camila and Ben for accepting the invitation. You know that I admire the work that you do, and somehow I believe that you understand the concern that we had in order to raise the issue of alternative media, cooperation, coordination, and socialism to something to be discussed in public. Of course, there are things that we cannot discuss on public, especially if we are coordinating and we are trying to reach and do construct things. But I believe that at the beginning we should open the discussion and let everyone know that there should be less competition and more coordination, more solidarity among alternative media. So first of all, I also want to raise that Steve Lala, that is part of our team, asked me to, at the beginning, to talk a little bit about ourselves in terms of our background in alternative media. Already Sahili talked a little bit about she read our short bios, but I believe that it's important to let everyone know our background. So I will start talking a little bit about my background, and then I'm going to ask Camila and Ben to talk a little bit about their background in terms of alternative media. So as Camila said, my experience in alternative media began in the 2000s, in the early 2000s, in 2002 actually, when I joined the team of Aporrea. And that happened in the midst of the coup d'etat against Hugo Chavez. I mean, and I'm talking about 2000, exactly 2002, 2003, and that embedded me into the world of alternative media, especially the alternative media in the web, scene, and I worked for them for years, but in 2013 I decided to withdraw myself from Aporrea because of their political position, and also because of the work that I was doing. And then in 2017, I came back to Venezuela, and I decided, out of love, but also out of necessity, to launch the project of Orinoco Tribune. And I've been doing this with the help of amazing people like the team that I already mentioned, but I forgot to mention also Elizabeth Ferrari from California, that she helped me for more than a year at the beginning, and she deserves the recognition. And what else I wanted to say? That's basically it. So Camila, Ben, please go ahead.
Do you want me to begin? I'll go first then. So I think most people kind of learned about the work I do covering Latin America through my work at Tell a Story English. And I guess about 4 years ago, or just over 4 years ago, I moved to Quito and began doing all sorts of positions there. And of course, that took me to Caracas and eventually Havana. And I've had the opportunity to work in many capacities, including as correspondent. And, you know, I think it was very challenging working in an office in the kind of setting that I had there. And so I always thought it was very important to be able to work on the ground. I didn't always have the ability to connect with social movements or be able to, you know, show what I felt was a more complete and straight to the source perspective of social movements and, you know, leftist parties in Latin America. And so that brought me to beginning something on the side, which of course was my coverage of Bolivia. And for so long, I wanted to do exactly what you're doing, Jesus, which is, you know, put a spotlight on Venezuela from a Chavista perspective, from, you know, reporting, you know, doing these interviews, and just very focused on one topic and doing it well. And that's, you know, involves things like translations and everything else. And, you know, there was never quite the space to do that in where I was working. So I decided to kind of do that on my own for Bolivia. And so, you know, eventually we launched Kawsachun News. As you know, we celebrated our 1-year anniversary just a few weeks ago on March 6th. And yeah, so I guess I'll explain a little bit more about what we've been doing, but we do intend to, despite COVID, do a little bit more reporting on the ground beginning in the coming weeks, and not just throughout Bolivia, but outside of Bolivia as well. So we're really excited to that you invited us on, and are really encouraged by your presence covering Venezuela specifically. And happy to be on here with Ben as well.
Yeah, and I'll join. It's a real pleasure speaking with all of you. I know Jesus from Venezuela. We spent some time together in Caracas and did an interview, and he's a great guy and runs a great website. Orinoco Tribune is an excellent resource. I recommend it to a lot of people, especially because of the translations that he does and his colleagues do, which is really important because there's a lot of reporting done only in the Spanish language that doesn't get coverage in the English language media. So I think it's a great resource, and I'm happy to be here. And I'll keep my experience really short, really brief. You know, I, as a journalist, got started in alternative media. I was freelancing, and then I wrote for about a year or so for this website, Mondoweiss, which is a really good resource on Israel-Palestine coverage. I would highly recommend anyone interested in following Israel-Palestine, the war in Gaza, etc., check out Mondoweiss. And I was freelancing in a few other places, and I had a brief experience in kind of mainstream media at this website, Salon, and it reinforced a lot of the ideas that I had about mainstream corporate media, about how stultifying it is, about how, especially on international issues, when it comes to the primary contradiction of imperialism, you're always, you know, you can't deviate from this bipartisan orthodoxy. So I remember when I was there at Salon for just about a year and a half, and then I was actually laid off as part of this operation when they brought in a neoliberal Silicon Valley CEO who laid off anyone mildly on the left from the editorial staff and brought on people to try to pump out sponsored content videos for corporations. But my experience there was interesting because to the extent that I was allowed to kind of challenge some of this stuff, especially around Israel-Palestine, the war in Yemen, even Venezuela, you would see that there were coordinated hate mail campaigns. And I'm not talking about a few random people. Of course, for many years, I've gotten hate mail from random people, but I'm talking about coordinated campaigns, especially around Israel-Palestine. So you'll see that these Zionist far-right groups, they will organize these campaigns that will make like these templates of letters, and then you just fill in your name in the letter and change a few words, and then you spam the editor's email and in the case of Salon, it was the editor-in-chief. They also spam the submissions email and other emails as a form of just like cluttering people's email boxes, trying to discourage them in every single way from publishing something that challenges that bipartisan imperialist orthodoxy. So, you know, I figured that there would be a lot of obstacles. When I went into it, I had come from alternative and independent media. I didn't expect, you know, having a very easy time. And Salon is, of course, one of them, at least it used to be kind of one of the more left-leaning of mainstream corporate media. But even there, again, faced all these obstacles. And then since then, I've been back in alternative media. I worked at Alternet, which was also kind of destroyed. Alternet was bought by a Hillary Clinton donor, multimillionaire, centrist, neoliberal Democrat, and has become a content aggregation mill that doesn't do any really original journalism anymore. But when I was at Alternet, my colleague Max Blumenthal and I, he's himself is an excellent journalist who kind of had some time in mainstream corporate media and was able on the margins to try to get some stuff published before, especially in Israel-Palestine, once again being just blacklisted because he challenged that bipartisan foreign policy orthodoxy, which in so-called liberal publications is just as strong as it is in conservative publications. And in Max and I were at Alternet. Alternet was bought by this neoliberal millionaire who laid everyone off, including us. And we went independent with Alternet, with the Grayzone. The Grayzone Project, it was called, had been part of Alternet. It was called the Grayzone Project because it was a project hosted at the former independent website Alternet. And then when Alternet went down, effectively, we went independent. And, you know, we've been growing a lot. What's great is we kind of realize that we don't need a larger institution, which will create all these barriers. We have the technological capacity to do our own journalism, and we have an audience of people who can help sustain our journalism through Patreon, through small donations on PayPal. So we've been able to make it work. We're a very small team. There's 4 of us. It's hard to scale that up, but I think that's something that can unite all of our experiences together is learning that if you do want to do alternative media, if you want to create your own platform, it is possible these days with the technology, despite all the limitations and the problems, it is possible to sustain an independent outlet if you have a small team and if you're willing to wear multiple hats, right? So the old model of mainstream newsroom journalism is you have the copy editors and the fact checkers and the contributing editors and the editor-in-chief and the publisher, and there's all this overhead and this bureaucracy, which honestly is often not really that necessary. I mean, it's important to have fact checking, it's important to have copy editing, but if you can be careful with your own journalism, or if one of your colleagues can help do that, and you can help fact check and copy edit their articles, and they can help fact check and copy edit your articles, I think you can do a good job. And we've been independent at the Grayzone now since January 2016. We just passed our 5th year anniversary, and to this date, we haven't had to retract any articles. We haven't had any major corrections. So it's a testament to the fact that if you have a small team of people who are ideologically developed and who are smart and dedicated and motivated, I think that we can create independent platforms. And I think everyone here should be applauded for that, because especially what Camila and Ali and the comrades in Bolivia are doing. I mean, it's such an incredible model, I think, that can be replicated, especially for national reporting, for focusing on a particular country. Because at the Grayzone, I mean, you could say we focus on the US empire, but we're focusing on international news because the US is not a normal country. It's an empire that's terrorizing and oppressing the entire world. But I think Kawsachun News is a great example, or in Ecuador, there's a new platform, Ecuador on Q. These are great examples of a model for how independent and alternative media can be developed, focusing on local domestic politics in a specific country. And that model can be applied, and it's small teams working independently through grassroots funding. It has to be grassroots. It has to be through popular support, because that's the only way to challenge the corporate media model of a big donor controlling what you publish.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you. It's nice to know that you work shortly in mainstream media. That might help us. You might give us some hints about your experience there and how to talk something from there in our advantage. You know what I mean? So I will invite you, the two of you, to unmute your mic, because I believe that now we should just like have an open conversation. But before that, because we are entering into the second movement of the webinar, in which I want to read something to put us in the perspective of the issues that concerns me about alternative media and how to coordinate ourselves. And I wrote this: how to coordinate better using technological tools in a democratic way in issues like, this is a paper that I wrote to help me, speak better and align my ideas. So basically, in that sense, I wrote keywords, tags, trending topics, referring to a minimum alignment to use the proper keywords, phrases, tags, hashtags, in order for alternative media to push our message. We all know that mainstream media do that. I mean, when I talk about keywords, I'm talking about, for example, maybe I'm not using the right word, but for example, in Venezuela, some journalists, right, left-wing journalists, refers to Juan Guaido, the opposition leader Juan Guaido. I hate to do that because I prefer to call him former deputy Guaido, and that has a meaning. I mean, I'm not choosing those words out of nowhere. I mean, I basically believe that the guy term ended, and he is not. I mean, he never has been actually an opposition leader. It's a fabrication from the U.S. So that kind of, and whenever you enter into a radio newsroom or a TV studio, you will always see those papers hanging all over saying, you don't say this, you say this. You know, that kind of alignment. I believe that we, as an alternative media, should we should coordinate better in that kind of alignment in order to make our message reach our audiences in a better way. And for that, no one has to impose on each other in terms of alternative media. I'm thinking like having like a web tool or something in which alternative media join and can vote for the for the right keywords or hashtags or trending topics that we should promote as a group, as a team. I understand that that's not easy. I understand that that's complicated because each alternative media has its own, dynamic, political views, a lot of things. But anyway, I believe that we should give it a try. And also, when I saw about this discussion, I also thought about the fundraising. I mean, Ben was talking about that, and he put it in a nice words, but sometimes we struggle, and sometimes I believe that we should try to support each one in the fundraising campaigns that we have, that we organize from time to time. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff can be coordinated, there should be more solidarity in that kind of stuff. I'm also thinking about common responses to censorship, and that's something that affects us a lot. And that goes also to the direct censorship that Twitter, Facebook, whatever media corporation can put on any of us, but also in the SEO algorithm censorship which I believe is the most important one, the most important one that affects us. And not too many people see it, but we as alternative media people, and we that see the technical side of the website, we know that those things are there and that those things affect us. And also, and it's connected somehow to the issue of the SEO things. SEO means search engine optimization, for those ones that do not know too much about internet and web developing and those kind of things. But also, sometimes we have technical issues, and why not? We can share like a bank of work in which we can, offer to help each other in certain areas in which each one of us has skills in order to make our life better. So I'm just putting like those 2 or 3 things out there for you to give me your impressions, your opinions about what I'm thinking, and maybe I'm thinking too much, and I'm just an idealist thinking that these kind of problems can be solved. So I'm open to your ideas, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is a question that we're kind of revisiting, not just among ourselves here at the radio station, at Kawsachun News, but also just, among social movements and among ALBA countries. They recently had a conference of high-ranking ministers and officials of the communication ministries of the ALBA member states. And they talked about the same type of thing, which is that, under Hugo Chavez and Fidel, they created all these wonderful institutions, among them Telesur, but there still remains this need to create better communication, not only, among Latin American and Caribbean people, but also to the world, that really just, brings the news to the world. And it's just, there's some major challenges that can be taken on more of a state level by this multilateral organization. And so I think we need, like, the whole concept of this discussion that you've brought us into is extremely important, something that we've wanted to have for a long time, because the fact is that we don't have any of the answers. And I just want to give a little bit of background, to what our operation is here. This is a radio station, and so it has massive reach within Bolivia. It's the most important news outlet in Bolivia. It's more important, arguably, than the Bolivian state television, Bolivia TV, which has 2 channels. It has a website, it has social media, and it has much more resources, and it's much more professionalized. And it's more important than the right-wing media outlets here that represent the oligarchy and have unbelievable amount of resources. Obviously, the presenters are models and famous people, but this is a radio station that reaches people through its airwaves. Every single worker that is a transport worker or a merchant, a vendor here in this rural area, but also in other parts of the country, listens to the radio station, whether it's like bands, Bolivian music, or whether it is political analysis and programs about international news, which is the program that my colleague Ali does in Spanish. And then as well, it has a huge emphasis on Facebook. And so on Facebook, they're doing Facebook Lives of all sorts of things that happen in this region, specifically this rural area, which is the Tropico of Cochabamba. And so everyone here, essentially every single person who works at this outlet is a correspondent. And each person, when they're not doing their radio show, goes out and they cover things like drug eradication. So if we hear or know that the authorities in charge of drug eradication are doing a bust, or they're launching a new initiative or something like that, we go to that and we cover that. And so this is something that we're kind of incorporating into what we do here in English, which is reporting on things that happen on the ground in kind of the most accessible way possible, not overcomplicating things. Unfortunately, we don't have, you know, the capacity in terms of staff, because we're small as well, to be able to do all sorts of long and intricate and sophisticated, you know, produced pieces. But what we are able to do is to provide, you know, on the ground reporting in Bolivia, and also, you know, interview people here, which are social movement and union leaders. And that's, you know, the very thing that is needed. Unfortunately, we won't be building, you know, the answer to the New York Times here anytime too soon. But what we do want to do is to be able to give a presence, have it be in English, and get news out rapidly, because that's what was missing in 2019 during the coup. And also, it was very difficult at times to find this information. In the case of the, you know, various episodes of destabilization in Venezuela, although all of us and other people have taken a turn being there on the ground and writing about these things, but you know, a lot of times, because it was so specific and small and the platforms for it weren't built, a lot of people weren't able to find that information. So we want to be constantly here on the ground and throughout Latin America, providing that information, and build ourselves up to where people don't have to dig for it, and where people don't have to go to outlets which are linked to or receiving financing from NGOs who receive their financing from the State Department.
You can go ahead, Ben. Did you audio stop, Camila? No.
No, yeah, okay. I didn't know if you wanted me to jump in. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. I don't know what exactly to respond to here, because you all raised a lot of points. I'll just say some of my thoughts in response to what you both said. Camila was talking about how Kawsachun is a radio station rooted in the grassroots, and I think that's so important, because we should be thinking about what our audiences are, what the constituencies are for independent media outlets, and it's so important to have it rooted in a social movement, a political movement, in a community. So in the case of Orinoco Tribune, I mean, it's clearly rooted in the Chavista tradition and the Chavista political movement, because I think so often a lot of people, when they create independent or alternative media outlets, it's not rooted in a movement that way. It's kind of just this independent thing. And when we created the Grayzone, one of the ideas was it's part of a project, a political project. And of course, we're doing fact-based journalism. And we, like I said, I mean, I want to stress, we've been smeared and attacked so many times, but we've actually never had to issue a retraction. We've never had to issue a major correction. And of course, all the smears and attacks they're political, they're not actually fact-based. But I think that the Grayzone, the idea is that it's part of a project to help develop an anti-imperialist left in the United States, because the left for decades has been very soft on imperialism, or even openly pro-imperialist. And of course, we could talk for hours about the fake left in the United States that supports wars and regime change operations and all of that. So it's important to kind of think about who the audience is and how to build that. So I think Kawsachun News is an amazing model, because if anyone asks me about what's going on in Bolivia, I always just tell them, follow Kawsachun News, follow Camila, and follow Ali. They're the ones reporting in English what's going on. And that's so important, because another point that Camila mentioned is the importance of translating this for your audience. And this gets back to the point I was just making. If you know who your audience is, you also know, what languages that your audience is speaking, right? So we have been trying to also develop a Spanish section on our website. I speak Spanish, and we have been working with some friends and comrades to translate some of our material, because, we do have a lot of people who read us and watch our videos in Latin America. But at the same time, I think it's so important to translate and to report on a lot of stuff happening in Latin America, because it never gets translated into English. And I mentioned earlier that I think this is one of the important values of Orinoco Tribune and the translations that you all do. Because what's incredible to me is, I follow the Spanish language press every day, including, mainstream bourgeois outlets. And there's even stuff reported in the right-wing mainstream Spanish language media, which is totally ignored in the mainstream English language media. So I think it's important to just to have that information out there. And then when it comes to what Jesus was saying about, trying to deal with technical issues, trying to deal with issues like fundraising, I mean, in terms of technical support, like I said, there's only 4 of us, and none of us is like a computer expert. Like I run the website, and I do any tech issue. I try to solve any tech issues we have, and I can't even program. Like I know at least Jesus can program. So I think that that's definitely one area in which people in alternative media could definitely collaborate more, is trying to figure out, how to solve some of these issues and try to share our knowledge together. But what's good is if you're rooted in a movement, like Kawsachun is rooted in the Bolivian social movements, the progressive movements, the anti-imperialist movements, then you also know that there are people in your audience that are part of those movements who might have those skills, who can be able to help. And whether that's through, tech issues, but any other issues or any other problems that we have. And then finally, for fundraising stuff, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to pretend like I know the secret to fundraising. Like I said, we're still a pretty small operation. There's only 4 of us, but we have had success with Patreon. And I don't think that that's necessarily a long-term solution. And especially when it comes to issues of sanctions and the U.S. blockade on Venezuela and U.S. sanctions on Nicaragua here and the blockade on Cuba and the increasing sanctions around the world. Unfortunately, Patreon is not a long-term solution for other people. It's not even a short-term solution for people in other countries. And of course, PayPal isn't either, of course, because PayPal is a US-based corporation, and PayPal, even in our case, we're a US-based media outlet and we're all US citizens. But even in our case, PayPal has blocked donations if they mention things like Iran, if they mention even the word Iran, if they mention things like Qasem Soleimani, if they mention certain names of people who are sanctioned by the US government. So unfortunately, I don't really know what the answer to that is, because that's a symptom of a large, massive issue, which is US control of the international financial system. So I think one way it might be good to try to figure out if there are other websites or technologies that allow crowdsourcing that don't involve PayPal and that don't involve Patreon. And that's something that even people like us who are US citizens, I think that's something that even we could help, try to get other people in the US in alternative media to adopt, because not only does that help encourage these new forms that are not controlled by the US banking system and the US government essentially, but also at the same time, it encourages this diversity of being able to work with journalists in blockaded countries, because the goal of these sanctions and the de facto blockades that the United States and the European Union have been carrying out, it's not only to cripple these countries, to suffocate the governments of revenue, to destabilize the governments with the goal of regime change. Of course, that's the primary goal, but it's also about creating what I've been calling a kind of digital apartheid, right? Electronic apartheid, or people call it the electronic Iron Curtain. And of course, even the term the Iron Curtain is Cold War propaganda, as if it was the Soviet Union and the socialist bloc. They were the ones who didn't want to interact with the rest of the world, when of course it was the exact opposite. They were the ones being blockaded and suffocated by imperialism. And similarly today, there's the same kind of electronic Iron Curtain where these US-controlled social media corporations and technology corporations, they don't want people in Western imperialist countries to be able to interact with Venezuelans and Iranians and Russians and Chinese and people in other blockaded countries, because they want to dehumanize them, right? And that's part of the strategy of trying to dominate the entire world by carving up these digital spaces. So unfortunately, I can't pretend like I have an answer to necessarily all of this stuff, but I think it's good to discuss these issues and maybe try to brainstorm solutions.
Yes, yes, and what I think when I talk about these issues, right, is that we as alternative media organizations should try to coordinate better, should try to communicate better among each other, and maybe opening at least every 3 months or something like that, some sort of meetings among ourselves in order to improve that kind of things that I told you, and maybe eventually developing some sort of, knowledge-based technologies or apps or tools that allow us to do better in those issues that I mentioned. It's just an idea, a crazy idea, but I believe that we should try to push it. I know that it's not easy. I know that, but I believe that we should, as alternative media, to strive towards that kind of stuff, towards solidarity, towards cooperation, instead of competition, because there's competition. And I'm not saying that competition itself is a bad thing. I actually compete a lot with the Grayzone in terms of the numbers. I'm always following the Grayzone numbers to try to see whenever I'm able to reach the Grayzone ranking. And I believe that absolutely okay. I mean, I at least that's the way I see it. I mean, you always should try to strive to move towards the things that you admire. But sometimes there's a competition that is not like positive. I mean, it's like the competition that try to invisibilize or put in a lower place whatever new scene is out there. I'm not sure if I'm explaining myself, but anyway, I mean, what I wanted to highlight with this debate is that those things are out there, and instead of digging into the negative side of the competition, we should do the contrary. We should try to move forward and develop tools or ways or strategies in order to make our work more effective. I understand that that's not an easy task, but I believe that we can try to do it. I mean, if we manage to have like 5 or 10 representatives for alternative media out there, and we organize meetings at least once every 3 months, we might at some point try to do what I told you at the beginning, that to coordinate better and to have like a common, a message or approach. And that takes me to the last part of the debate, in which I wanted to raise the issue of the ideological perspective, because I believe that we have, I mean, the most complicated part of coordination is to be ideologically aligned. So if you are not ideologically aligned, it's going to be hard. It's like asking Ben to coordinate with the Jacobins. That kind of stuff. You know what I mean? I mean, there are things that are, or in the contrary, I mean, asking the Jacobin to coordinate with the Grayzone, I mean, those are ideological barriers that cannot, that might make difficult an alignment. But I believe that if there is a minimum of agreement in terms of the basic issues like anti-imperialism, I mean, the causes of the working class, I mean, different issues that might not necessarily imply that we are part of this tendency within the socialist ideology ideology or that other tendency. I mean, if we find a common ground, we might have, like, as I told you, like, at least I see, and I'm not a word expert on those issues, but I see that at least we should have like between 10 or 15 alternative media, maybe 5 or 10 alternative media out there that might be aligned with the same views that we have. I mean, with Camila and with that I don't see now, maybe she has technical troubles, and also with the Grayzone. So what I'm saying is that that alignment is necessary, but of course, you need a common ground in order to reach your goals. And I'm saying this also because within every, and I believe that happened also in the Grayzone or in Kawsachun news. I mean, basically, I mean, within our own organizations, within our own alternative media, we have like different perspectives, different ideas on how to achieve socialism. Maybe there's more conservative perspective from one person, and there's a more progressive and more radical perspective from another one, and sometimes it's complicated to deal with that. But even within each alternative media, that debate should be open, because that's gonna be the key to advance towards socialism. You know what I mean? I mean, at least for us in Orinoco Tribune, and defending Venezuela and defending Chavismo is a key issue. And being against anti-imperialism is another one. But also, being a tool to try to promote socialist ideas, not only in Venezuela, but in other countries, is something that is somehow within our inner core. You know what I mean, Ben? So I believe that we should discuss those things, because that sometimes create some sort of frictions within our alternative media. And of course, when you are talking about moving forward and look for some sort of alliance with other organizations, that also will create frictions. So give me your idea about this issue, Ben, while we wait for Camila to come back. Maybe Steve might be doing something to try to recover Camila. But let's hear you first, then.
Yeah, well, while I'm waiting for Camila, a few thoughts. I think that what's interesting is you're talking about the ideological divisions within alternative media. You know, it's pretty incredible, because speaking of ideological divisions, especially within the US independent media, there are so many people who attack us. In fact, some of the people who attack us the most are people who claim to be independent media, including some of the editors of Counterpunch, who support the dirty war on Syria, and who supported regime change in Nicaragua. So I think that what that does is it's a reflection of the political situation. The difference is that the left in Latin America is so much more developed and sophisticated and powerful, in the sense that it actually has roots in communities, whereas in the US, the left has been so astroturfed by NGOs and big billionaire funded foundations. So I think that the independent media platforms so frequently reflect those problems with the political and social movements that they are supposed to represent. So I think that's why I just keep coming back to this, that, you know, Orinoco Tribune is rooted within Chavismo, and Jesus, you broke from Aporrea because they were the ones, the so-called critical Chavistas, who were actually many of them are anti-Chavistas. Like that, you know, that is a reflection of the splits within those media platforms, is a reflection of what was actually happening in these political movements. So that's why it's good to see internationally, it's good to see, I think, the Kawsachun news model becoming more popular, because I think, again, just going back to this, I think that is a really important model that can be rooted within communities and social movements, because Kawsachun News is a Bolivian news outlet reporting on what's going on in Bolivia. And the Bolivian left, you know, it aside from now, you know, the MAS party is in power, so there are some state media outlets, but the entire media industry in Bolivia, like in many countries, is dominated by right-wing, corporate-controlled propaganda platforms. So I think in the United States, in the case of independent alternative media, it's a very different case. But in a lot of other countries, people who are part of progressive movements, they don't need many resources, and they can look at what Kawsachun is doing, or Ecuador and Q is doing, or Orinoco Tribune is doing, and do something very similar in their own countries. And I would highly recommend looking to them, because unfortunately the US is, like I said, it's not a normal country, it's an empire. And I think the awful problems with the left and the problems with independent media in the US are a reflection of that fact.
You want to add something, Camila? I know that you might have missed a part of what we talked, but we are talking about the political part of the whole issue. You know, I mean, the political frictions that might be within our own alternative media that might create frictions within our organizations, but also the frictions, the political, differences that might create frictions if you are trying to align, if you are trying to coordinate better among different alternative medias worldwide.
Absolutely. Well, I am sorry I missed so much of what you guys said. There was a point where even I was still on the call, but everything was frozen. I couldn't hear anything. So that happens. And it might be happening because we have some very important event taking place here. So yeah, well, I'll just tell you what's going on here. It's that because I feel a little lost in the conversation, but a really great thing is being launched today at the radio station, which is that now the Juventudes, the youth of the 6 federations, which is this campesino union here, which are the owners of our media outlet, are launching their own weekly program. And of course, their honorary guest will be Evo. And so they've been doing test runs and everything like that, which might be why we're getting cut off. But I think it's just going to be a bunch of the youth leaders, and they're just going to sit around the table. It's actually different from the main cabina, the main room, which they do the radio programs out of. So they're going to have kind of like their own room to do their show with a round table. And I guess they're going to interview guests and talk about issues. And I think that's so important. I think before I went to Telesur, when I went to the MST, to the political formation school of the landless workers movement in Brazil, I took 5 years ago, I took a workshop on radio, and I thought that was what I was going to maybe launch someday, was my own radio station, because of the immediate and urgent nature of information, that we don't have the means or the capacity as social movements or as little people without a platform or without financial resources and technical experience and stuff like that to be able to put out this information about what's going on. And so I always thought that's something I can do. I can set up my own radio station. And this is before I knew that podcasts were like going to be a thing that everybody does, or webinars or Zoom or anything like that. I thought this would be the best way to get out information from Latin America and from social movements. Of course, thinking back to Radio Venceremos, thinking about these different radio communications during revolutionary processes in Latin America, and thinking about how that could be done in English. But not in the US, because obviously there are some progressive radio shows and stations in the US. And so they're going to be able to do that starting today. And what's really great about it is that, I'm not really sure what their average age is. We're actually supposed to be covering it as soon as I get off with you guys, but it's going to allow these guys to be able to learn from, so let's say that the average age is like 20, 22, or even, I don't know, maybe they're older, but they'll be able to learn from the people who actually work on the radio, these technical skills, and be able to run their own programs. Maybe they'll just ditch us and get rid of this and just go start their own thing and rent their own building and have their own radio station. And these are kind of the skills that they're going to need to have. And it's something that we want to be able to in the future contribute to other people as well. Because the kind of journalism that we've been doing, the kind of reporting that we've been doing, and that people learned about us from was literally just us going out and taking cell phone video of protests, of cultural events, things like that, and just posting it to social media. We, apart from, the fact that I was a television producer at Telesur, doing all sorts of interview programs and the news program and stuff like that, the stuff that's been really meaningful and impactful has just been what we've done with our cell phones. And that is exactly what they're going to be able to do here, starting with a chat show or whatever it is, but, moving towards different types of creating their own media and not having to use other platforms, which the kind of problem, if there were, if we're going back to what are some of the contradictions or some of the issues that we face within our media outlets, one thing that the radio station here has in common with some other outlets, let's say Telesur, is that there is this tendency to report on what's going on from the government perspective when we work underneath the government that we, technically support and which we align with ideologically in a lot of ways. But what happens is that it's very easy when the government, let's say the interior minister or the health minister is trying to promote a campaign or a program, it's very easy for, instead of the journalists going out and speaking to people on the ground and, trying to create a story about, something that takes, a little bit more work, it's easier to just, put out a piece of information that says, the health ministry is providing this to people. And this is kind of a trap that we fall into. Personally, we're not going to fall into that as Kawsachun News because we don't even receive funding from any government, and we never have. Thus, it's very important to receive any sort of funding from our supporters, which brought us to, Bolivia and doing all the reporting we've been able to do. So I think that, as these guys begin to learn some of the same skills that we've been able to learn, we hope to pass on, they'll be able to, report on things that are very important to them. And also, we also just fall into the trap of needing, again, not Kawsachun News specifically because we're so small, but larger outlets with a few more people, they have, quotas or a certain amount of social media posts they have to do per day, a certain amount of articles, and people just begin to write things just for the sake of getting out articles onto the website, for the sake of having content there on their pages, on the website, on the YouTube channel or whatever it is, without really analyzing the worth of these pieces, without any strict ideological discipline being enforced by some sort of editor, and asking ourselves why these things are important, how this helps shape our understanding of the current context here in this region of the country, as in Bolivia or throughout the region. And so these are kind of things that we personally, from our project's perspective, want to keep kind of, a tight control of. And this is the reason why we have so many comrades and so many supporters and so many people who have reached out to us that we would like to begin to, grow that relationship with and have them contribute to our project, have them help us. But we also want to, and specifically I'm speaking about myself, is to keep a very tight control, because going back to what you said earlier, Jesus, that we have people saying, calling Juan Guaido opposition leader. There's all sorts of other things that Juan Guaido has been called as well, and they don't really make sense and they're not accurate. And also words mean things. We can't just say whatever and be like, oh, well, we're still supporting, the sovereignty of the Venezuelan people. Well, I mean, we're talking about sometimes social media posts that are just a few sentences long. So it is very important to make sure that we do these things with intentionality, and that we are very focused on what our objectives are in providing this reporting. So I'll hand it back to you guys so I can kind of get a sense of what you covered while I was trying to figure out the internet.
I believe that what you say makes sense, especially because of the importance of considering, and I have to admit that whenever I wrote the things that you read for this panel, that I sent you for this panel, I was not thinking, for example, in radio, but the fact is that radio is might be, like in the case of Kawsachun News, an alternative media. And there are also other kinds of alternative media, like street work and newspapers, local newspapers, and that kind of stuff. And of course, that complicates my approach a little bit in terms of how to coordinate among that bigger, universe. But anyway, I mean, I believe that we should be aware that is also alternative media, and especially I believe that is one of the most important ones because it's connected, like in your case, with the people. I mean, and that's an amazing. That should be an amazing experience to work for Kawsachun News. That is like something that is, as Ben said, rooted in the people. And we, for example, in Orinoco Tribune, we are a bunch of Chavista, progressive people, but we need that part also of connecting with the people, and we hope that eventually we might be able to reach that level. But I'm going to stop talking because we have to open the mics for questions and answers. And for that, we have Steve Lala that is going to try to summarize the questions that we received. So go ahead, Steve.
You can hear me?
Yes.
So we're not going to be able to get to all the questions. Thanks everyone for sending them, and thanks to the panelists. I think the first one was George Jensen had mentioned this on the Q&A. He talked about an indexing and search service that he created, or I'm not sure if he created it, called alterlook.org. And it searches 40 or 50 different news sites for whatever you enter. And it made me think also of the way that Google is. I think we all often know it's pretty much useless for searching actual news. You just get all the big sites. So
Steve, I missed the audio for a second. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, it's from George Jensen, and we're talking about alterlook.org, which is a search and indexing engine that searches 40 or 50 different websites for a particular topic. So I guess the question is there a way that alternative media, I mean, I think of Progressive International too, which is another, it's a paid service that sort of tries to aggregate a bunch of different media outlets and allow you to search through them. Is there a way that we can circumvent the big search engines like Google and create a system where people can find alternative news easier and better?
That's a good question. I'm not aware of that. I mean, I believe that there should be a way, but you know, the humongous apparatus that Google's means instead of, you know, open or not open the access to information, is like a big monster to defeat. But that doesn't mean that we cannot do things to try to, I believe that we should try to do that kind of, you know, attempts, you know, to try to open different tools to try to let people go directly to some tools in order to get the information they want. I mean, there are tons of things that can be done. I mean, we can use also apps and things like that, and web tools like the one that the person that made the question proposed. But I don't know what Camila and Ben can do about it, can say about it, sorry.
Well, I'll just jump in for a second. I think when it comes to the issue of trying to get around these big tech monopolies, I have a bit complex views on this, because when it comes to social media platforms, I think our goal and the goal of any independent media outlet should be to reach as many people as possible. So we have to use the platforms that the majority of people are using. And first and foremost, as Camila mentioned, that's Facebook. A lot of people, especially in the US, there's this kind of like cachet thing where people, they're all like, oh, Facebook is stupid. Only old people use Facebook or whatever. It's this kind of ridiculous view. And I mean, Facebook is an awful corporation, not that Twitter is much better of a corporation, and Instagram is of course owned by Facebook. But the thing is, Facebook is used by something like 2 billion people, and especially in Latin America and other countries, a lot of people use Facebook. So it's important to try to at least engage with the platform and try to get information out there, even if it's going to be repressed by the algorithm. Now, we're not going to be able to, as individuals, solve the issue of censorship in the algorithm, although we can draw attention to it. And if it becomes part of a political program, it becomes part of a social movement, we can force these corporations, at least in the short term, to try to change their policies as we look toward social transformation, right? But when it comes to things like search engines, I think that, you know, we can use other search engines and encourage people to use other search engines. I use DuckDuckGo just because it's the most popular alternative. And I mean, maybe there are issues with it. I don't know. I'm not super knowledgeable about it, but I do notice that when it comes to independent and alternative media outlets, they are heavily repressed on Google and not nearly as much on DuckDuckGo. And that's true for many different outlets. I've noticed that with another great outlet, I should mention Mint Press, one of the independent outlets in the United States, based in the United States, that does really good, consistent anti-imperialist coverage. I would recommend them. There's also a relatively new outlet in the United States that's called Breakthrough News, which is also rooted in the social movements and is excellent, anti-imperialist, great news, great content. Those websites are heavily repressed in the algorithm. And then, of course, we at the Grayzone are also totally blacklisted. In fact, if you try to look up in Google like a headline of one of our articles, the Grayzone won't come up. So, I mean, only the home page and the keyword page or tag pages, archive pages are not blacklisted. But Google, we know that Google has a blacklist of websites. This has been reported on by multiple outlets that Google has a literal list of different websites that it puts on the blacklist to prevent those websites from coming up in search results. And of course, the majority of those websites.
I mean, sorry for stopping you. I mean, if I Google one of the headlines that you post every day, nothing will come up. Nothing from your website? That's crazy. That's crazy. Did you try Google Console and all those tools in order to try to verify that the website is properly mapped?
Properly indexed and mapped? Yeah. No, it's because there's a blacklist. This is, ironically, this was actually reported on by a right-wing website called the Daily Caller, which, like the Grayzone, is also blacklisted on Wikipedia, because there's an entire industry of people who get paid to just try to censor these websites on corporate media. And so we're also blacklisted. We can never be mentioned on Wikipedia, never be cited, because of this campaign that was led, in fact, largely by Venezuelan regime change operatives, these right-wingers, probably based in the United States. I don't know where they're based, but they admit in their profiles to being right-wing Venezuelans. And I wrote an article about that. But the point is that there's an entire industry of people who get paid and probably work for governments and intelligence agencies and corporations and what have you, these large institutional actors that are committed to blacklisting independent news, especially on Google. And the Daily Caller got access because they had a contact in Google, and they got access to a list of some of the websites. And of course, the majority of these websites are anti-war, anti-imperialist, left-wing, also some libertarian-leaning websites. And this is just focusing on English. It's different for other languages that I'm not as aware for other languages. But the point is that Google, I mean, it's an arm of the US government. Google has contracts with the CIA, with the US military, with different police agencies. Google is the US government. It's just a privatized arm of the US government, like so much of the US government, because it's capitalism on steroids. And when it comes to search engines, I think those are one of the things where we can encourage people to use alternative platforms. Of course, we can try to use other alternative media, social media platforms like Mastodon and Minds and all of these. But the issue, in my mind, the issue is that, you know, I have accounts and we have Grayzone accounts on all of those platforms, but the issue is just that there's so few people using those websites. So I honestly think that we have to use the social media platforms that do exist, and Telegram has become more popular, and that's one platform. But the reality is that we, with access to little capital and few resources, we're not going to be able to challenge the big social media monstrosity corporations. But I think that we can at least try to work within what does exist, because look, technology is just as much of it, it's a double-edged sword. It's just as much of a tool of control and censorship as it is a tool for allowing independent and alternative media platforms.
What do you think, Camila?
Yeah, I echo everything Ben has said. I think it's, only through the use of YouTube and Facebook and Twitter that Telesur was able to share the work, which was the Empire Files, which was when Abby Martin went to Venezuela in 2017 and gave a spotlight to this issue, which was the Guarimba protest. And that was really important. At that stage, I was not any sort of presenter or correspondent. And so, the Grayzone was not in Caracas. We really just, had Venezuela analysis, for instance, in terms of like where we were getting news. And so for us to be able to get that information out, it was so unheard of. And absolutely anyone who heard about what was going on in Venezuela just thought that this is a dictatorship and it's a regime that's attacking its people. I mean, this is an unbelievable lie that in 2021, we would be able to combat, all of us, would be able to step right in with our, our outlets as established as they are, and just with the social media presence we have, even on Twitter alone, and be able to dismantle the lies that people were telling in 2017, and we didn't have the means to do it. Only, through the limited reach that Telesur and Telesur English had, were we able to fight back against some of these, against the massive coordinated media war against Venezuela's elected government. And so I think that we saw the same sort of thing in 2019 when the coup was building up and after it took place, that even though Radio Kawsachun Coca here was censored on Facebook, which is the main platform it uses on social media, when it did have its account restored, it was absolutely crucial for getting information out, namely circulating this video of Jesús Rodríguez, who is the president of the vice president of the Six Federations Union. The union here, the president is Evo. Evo was in exile. Evo had, taken a plane to Mexico, and Andrónico came and said that, we're leading a resistance against this coup. And this is very important that the resistance came from this area here, but that they were able to use Facebook to disseminate those messages, those statements saying this is what's happening, this is the action we're taking. And, they had no other platform to do that. Had they tried to do it through some, weird, brand new, more friendly platform, no one would have been able to see it. So that was very important, as well as the use of WhatsApp, which is, owned by the same company. But unfortunately, had they attempted to convert people to Signal and Telegram or some other platform in terms of people's mobile messaging, it wouldn't have gotten very far. So we continue to use these platforms, but I'm very open to, as Ben has said, as Ben has stated that they did with their outlet, opening, accounts on other new platforms, knowing that there aren't very many users, but hoping that someday we'll be able to coordinate, a move towards these to these different platforms.
That's true. That's true. And I just want to add that according to my fast evaluation that I did a few weeks ago, only for the last year, in the sources for people clicking in Orinoco Tribune, DuckDuckGo, is the second most important one after Google. Just to give you a sense of, on how fast DuckDuckGo has been becoming a reference in terms of people using it. But going back to the question, I mean, as you just said, Camila, and Ben before you, I mean, it's true. I mean, we should try to reach as many platforms as possible, but the truth is that the biggest ones are the ones controlled by imperialism. But we have to keep the battle also inside there. Go ahead, Steve, with the next questions if there is any other one.
I actually have a really, hopefully it could be a really quick question for Ben, but George says that DuckDuckGo is just a proxy of Google. And I'm wondering, Ben, if your Grayzone headlines show up on DuckDuckGo since you use it.
Yeah, I haven't had the same issue in DuckDuckGo,
Okay.
but I didn't know that DuckDuckGo has any relations with Google. Like I said, I mean, I haven't followed this stuff super closely, and I'm skeptical of any of these big tech corporations because it's capitalism.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, that's what George Jansen says, and I'm inclined to think there's probably a bit of truth to it. So maybe that's something to look out for. I had another question from Joe Emersberger. He didn't go into too much details, but I think I know what he's talking about. Hi, Joe, by the way. The question is about government-supplied media vouchers, and I know in Canada we have a couple of politicians that have brought up this idea. And I guess the idea is that part of money funds would go from political parties to a chosen media outlet of their a media outlet of their choosing based on the amount of votes they get or something like that. And if that has been discussed in Latin America and how it could be particularly useful, obviously, for combating, I guess, the right wing or mainstream or US-backed media. Camila, maybe you can start if you have any comments on that.
Well, Jesus, can I ask you if you're aware of anything like that exists?
No, at least in Venezuela, we haven't discussed about that. I'm amazed with what Steve is saying. Yes, no, at least that I'm aware of, we don't have that kind of debate right now in Venezuela. But that will be a great thing for us, at least in Venezuela, because PSUV is the main political force. But I believe that in other countries, it might be different.
I mean, you're saying that it would involve a vote? Because if it were to involve a vote, then what would the outcome be? Would it be like some sort of proportional distribution of the money? I mean, it sounds like there would be a lot to sort out and define within that. And it sounds like there would be still very little money for outlets like us, even under a scheme as such.
Yes, I like. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, well, I don't really know anything about this. It's an interesting idea. I think when we're talking about government funding of media outlets, it also really depends on the character of the government. In the case of the US government, it's never going to ever fund socialist, anti-imperialist media because, like I've been saying, the US is not a normal country. It's an empire, and it's the world's protector of capitalism. I'm not really sure about the situation in Canada. I do know that in some Western European countries that there's kind of a similar model of state support for the kind of political apparatus. So in the case of Germany, for instance, the Die Linke party, which has its own many internal contradictions, but there is a wing of the Die Linke party that is anti-imperialist and a solidly good left wing of the party. And I do know that there's a law there that any party that meets a certain threshold in the Bundestag gets proportionate funding for their own foundation. But, you know, I'm a Yankee over here. I'm a US citizen. In the US, that's socialism. Like, I'm being sarcastic, but that would be considered some crazy communist idea in the US of funding media. So, I mean, I think ideally in a country like Venezuela, you know, that would be a good model. And I do know here in Nicaragua, there were when the Sandinista front has always had media outlets, like for instance, barricadas. And I do know that when the Sandinistas, of course, when they were in a revolutionary struggle in the 1970s and they succeeded in overthrowing the US puppet regime, and in the 1980s, barricadas became effectively kind of state media. And then when the Sandinistas lost power after the US terrorist war in the 1990s in the neoliberal era, barricadas continued as an independent media arm of the Sandinista front, and it still was printing. And today, barricadas still exists as a popular media platform, and it's kind of, you know, it's an organ of the Sandinista front. So, I mean, there are other models to look at, but I don't know anything about Canada in particular.
That would be nice.
Well, I mean,
Anyway.
we're far from having anything like that in place.
Was the question not as well that it's like, you know, not necessarily government, but also parties, which, you know, regardless of what their representation in the parliament would be? I mean, that would be a very interesting question in the case of Canada, particularly at times when there was a larger NDP representation in the parliament, I guess. What sort of outlets would they give money to? I think it would still perhaps be the same outlets that are pretty well established now, and not necessarily, you know, necessarily anti-imperialist. They may be ones that have, you know, a few more solid links to the labor movement, but I don't know that it's, you know, what we're looking for necessarily.
Yes. Is there another question, Steve?
Yeah, there's other questions. But did you all see Joe Emersberger's comment? He writes, it would be every voter getting the same piece of the government's budget. So every voting age person getting a small amount of money, say equivalent of $200 per voter. And it doesn't have to be done by a national level government. So I guess he's just sort of explaining that idea. And Nino also says something that's very applicable, which is the Canadian government funds the CBC, which promotes the official government political line, as we know. But I guess maybe this would encourage voters to vote for a smaller party like the NDP, or even smaller parties like the Green Party or the Marxist-Leninist Party or whatnot, knowing that a couple of $100—
Or the Communist Party, who's turning 100 years old, celebrating its 100th anniversary today, which was born on May 28th, 1921, and they're going to be celebrating on Sunday with an online event. But today is their 100th anniversary, and it's just absolutely amazing. They are one of the only parties that consistently contributes with their solidarity and other forms of support to revolutionary anti-imperialist movements and processes and parties here in Latin America, including, of course, the coup here in Bolivia. So it's just absolutely very exciting that they're still around and that they're growing right now. If this involved the Communist Party of Canada, that would be very exciting. And if it were, you know, somehow devised that it would, you know, contribute to people not wanting to throw away their vote and actually voting for a party which they actually care about, which actually aligns with their own principles and ideology, that would be absolutely incredible, especially given everything that's going on with Palestine, and that, you know, these other parties, especially the NDP, were just completely useless in everything that's happened.
Yeah, it's an important anniversary. Any other comments on what Nino and Joe added?
I just want to shout out Joe. Joe is awesome. Speaking of independent journalists, definitely follow Joe Emersberger. Constantly good work, and it seems like a good model. Maybe he should write an article about it. It seems like a good model that countries could apply.
Yes, absolutely, that's true. I have not heard about that before, and it's interesting anyway.
Another question we had a question for Camila, which she started answering and answered a little bit, which was maybe just it was so interesting to hear about the personal experiences as opposed to, you know, hearing stories about what's going on in the world. But maybe you can tell a little bit about your personal experiences during the Bolivian coup and how this affected Kawsachun particularly, and other media outlets.
You know, like, I really cared about what was going on in Bolivia and paid very close attention the whole year before the coup took place. And so, you know, through the small platform that I had as a producer, as you know, I did all sorts of different jobs there. In my previous work at Telesur English, I always tried to insert coverage of the situation in Bolivia, knowing that something very similar to what we saw with the destabilization in 2017, most recently in Venezuela, was taking place during that entire year. And that the right and the far right here in Bolivia was making, you know, political issues out of everything. You know, they're politicizing public health all of a sudden, even though we know they don't care about the public health system, and they don't care about public goods. They don't care about investment in social programs, but all of a sudden they were pretending to care, and doctors were getting riled up against the government. Pro-coup doctors, of course, are members of the health sector. Then we had people from the right and the far right pretending to care about the environment and the fires in the Chiquitania. And so this is just an absolute scandal. And so we knew that something was brewing. And so as much, you know, to the extent possible, we were doing interviews and trying to cover that. And you know, we wanted to cover the elections, and then, you know, there was not really the support within the organization to do that, or perhaps the funding. And so what ended up happening was that I just told them my work, that I was going on an annual leave, and I just purchased my own ticket here on my own, not reporting for any outlet, and which was on its own, you know, very expensive and difficult to do. I had to travel to Guayaquil. I was in Quito, and I just showed up here. And this was the day after Anya swore herself in, just because I couldn't wait any longer. And I had wanted to earlier mention, you know, Mint Press News, because that was how I was able to recover those funds and even be here during that period. And of course, as always, I sent back all of my materials and all of my reports and the images I had and everything and interviews to Telesur, because at the end of the day, it is a, you know, a outlet that is for Latin America and works in the interests of the peoples. And I wanted them to have that material. And I'm very happy to have been able to collaborate with my colleagues in La Paz, which is Freddie Morales and the Telesur team there. But it honestly wouldn't have really happened this way had I not just come here. Ollie wasn't living here in Bolivia at the time, and he had no way of getting here. So yeah, I came here, I made an appeal. If you saw online, I was contacting people, just asking different journalists if they would be able to cover this. And I just, you know, it was a little bit of a desperate thing, because we had just seen it happening in slow motion. We saw the claims of fraud taking place in slow motion. And the thing is, even before that, we had talked about building this outlet, but it wasn't going to be Kawsachun News. It didn't have that name. And it was actually going to be based in La Paz, possibly. So anyways, that's another story. But we had always wanted to do this. And then, you know, just, it was all of a sudden, all the media in the world decided that this was important, having ignored it for so long. Telesur was one of the only outlets, or the most important outlet. Obviously, Hispan TV and Edite and RT in Spanish decided to also cover it, and quite well. But throughout the process, Telesur was the most important. But we just thought that something had to exist on a consistent basis in English, and we couldn't allow what has happened so many times since the beginning of the Bolivarian Revolution, and those attacks happen here, because a very unique and different and important revolutionary process is happening here, with very unique and, you know, distinct a very set of circumstances compared to Venezuela. It's not the same as Venezuela or Cuba or Nicaragua or anywhere else. And we thought that it was worth just dedicating, you know, coverage to on an ongoing basis. And so, you know, I've come back here several times since, and now I live here permanently. I'll be able to, you know, go out and report in different countries, and we think that is very important as part of our coverage to be on the ground in different parts of Latin America as well. But now that's where we're based, and we thought that throughout the 12-month coup that it was very important to show the, you know, the resistance that was happening here on the ground. And when I had to go back to work my, office job at Telesur, I was able to convince Ali to come here, and he ended up being able to come here and stay here throughout the process. So even when I was not here, he was here reporting on the most important events of, the social movement's resistance to the dictatorship, including the very important blockades that took place that forced the regime to hold the elections that resulted in the restoration of democracy in October or November when RC took power.
Okay,
question?
There's more questions, but we're supposed to stop at 6:30, so I think I'm going to close my video and maybe let each of you have some closing comments, and maybe Gabrielle will wrap things up after that. Thank you for your answers.
Yes, thank you, Steve. Thank you. And I, before giving the mic to Gabriel, I want to mention one question that I saw from Nino Paglia from Canada, and he suggested to have like a big database or list of alternative media. And I believe that Steve is the man for that. I mean, Steve have an amazing database divided by continents, countries, and everywhere that we might put at the, we might send to Nino. And maybe we should think in, putting that thing online to let people know about these different outlets, progressive outlets are out there. Before giving the mic to Gabriel, I want to thank you, Camila and Ben, for accepting the invitation. I want to, again, to invite you to reflect about those things and think that maybe we should move on in doing things more collectively, and organizing things and meeting or something like that in a more organic way. And it's your turn, Gabriel. Thank you, everyone that accepted the invitation also and participated in the webinar, guys.
Well, can everybody hear me? Hi, hello.
Yes.
Well, we have come to the end of the webinar now with Camila and Ben. On behalf of Orinoco Tribune, we would like to express our sincerest gratitude to the panelists for being with us today. Just to summarize shortly some of the points, some of the important points that we might have, that might have been discussed today, although there was many things which were important, but just to summarize some of the points, I think it's important to mention something that was mentioned about that it's possible to do journalism with small teams and with grassroots efforts. That was something which I think was very important, and I think a lot of people agreed. Also, something that Camila mentioned, which was a creation of better communication, not only in Latin America, but throughout the world, of having an international perspective, of going towards other continents and other places and know what's going on there. Another important point was the importance of rooting our media efforts in political movements. That was something also which was also important to mention. And also the importance of looking for other forms of crowdsourcing besides the short-term solutions that we now have. Also the importance of radio, of other mediums that could go beyond the internet. Of course, as being in Latin America, we know how important radio is for communities, for rural communities, and for places which might not have internet access still. Another thing was the importance of working within the platforms, despite the censorship. The importance of continuing to have efforts to be able to bring alternative media to people, no matter how difficult this is becoming more and more. Well, thank you so much. One thing I want to mention before we leave is that I would like to invite everyone watching now to an interview that we're going to have, that Orinoco Tribune is going to have on May the 31st with Suzanne Ross. She's the spokesperson for the International Concerned Family and Friends of Mumia Abu Jamal, sorry. And that's going to be on May the 31st at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Caracas time. The interview is going to be conducted by our very own Jesús Rodríguez-Espinoza. Orinoco Tribune would like to thank everyone who joined today. Thank you for watching. Please share this webinar on social media. Also, please follow Kawsachun News, the Grayzone, Orinoco Tribune on social media, and please read their reporting on their respective websites. And well, thank you very much. Until next time, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning.
Thank you, Gabriel. Listen, Ben and Camila, if you want to say a few words before leaving, you are free to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just.
Yeah,
I
wanted to say.
Go ahead.
No, go for it, Ben.
Yeah, concluding, I'm glad you summarized those key points. I think that's really important. I agree that we should all communicate more and be in discussion of how we can collaborate. And another thing is, I just want to encourage anyone listening to this, especially if you're in a country and you want to focus on more domestic reporting, I would encourage you to just create, not alone, with a group of comrades and friends, of course. I mean, or it could be alone, but it's better with a small group because you might go kind of crazy alone. But create a project, and especially if you're in a country and you want to focus on that domestic situation politically, look to what Kawsachun News has been doing or Ecuador on Q. When I was in Ecuador, I spent time with the comrades at Ecuador on Q. It's a great team. It's also a very small team. It really is possible, something that Camila stressed in this discussion, which is important. You can just film with your phone and you can use headphones. As long as those headphones have like the little mic, the audio quality is pretty good. The video quality is good on most phones these days. All you have to do is be able to edit it, and you can use an editing software from your computer or a friend's computer or whatever. I mean, I mentioned that technology is a double-edged sword, and of course, with censorship and surveillance and control, there's so many downsides of technology, but there are some good sides. And one of the good sides is that it is really easy to do grassroots journalism these days. And if you do it in a team and you are consistent, and you just focus on, you know, like I said, if you have an audience and you're rooted in a social movement, you can actually do it yourself. It's actually easier than it looks. A lot of people think it's really hard, but don't believe all the gatekeepers. You should do it if you're motivated to do it. And you can message any of us. You can message me. My DMs are open on Twitter. I would highly encourage it. And I'm moved by, I think that model is so effective of Kawsachun, of Ecuador on Q, of Orinoco Tribune. It's really great to see. And I hope that, you know, we can all work together. And I definitely encourage anyone who wants help, reach out to me, and I'd be happy to.
Absolutely. And there are so many individuals and groups of people who are already doing that. And I think that, you know, without even knowing it, they have begun to, through social media, build a personality and have given themselves a platform, just being, for example, a member of, you know, a leftist group in the US that just has followers online. So that's been incredibly important. And I think that that needs to be, you know, some of these practical skills that we kind of develop on our own out of necessity needs to be, where possible, spread to, you know, people around us here, so that we could actually have some comrades working with us who, you know, might not be English speakers, but who can contribute equally, doing basically the same things as we do with our cell phones and such. So I do hope that we are able to better coordinate going forward. I'm so glad to be on here with you. Thank you so much for inviting us, and congratulations to you guys on your 2.5 years and for your first official webinar. It was very well organized, so thank you to everyone on the team, and congrats on the massive feats at the Grayzone and the big reach you guys have, especially in the US, which is so important during your 5 years. We have a lot to learn from the two of your outlets. And we thank everyone for their support. We have some really big coverage planned. And the rest of this year, we're going to try to kind of, at least on my part, pretend as if COVID doesn't exist and try to overcome these obstacles that have prevented us from doing on-the-ground reporting, and try to do more on-the-ground reporting, which is, you know, how we got our start as an outlet. And we'll be doing that outside of Bolivia as well, which I won't tell anyone about yet, because it's important that travel is safe and unintercepted. But you know, all of this has only been and continues to only be possible because of people supporting us through our Patreon. And we haven't had great success, as some people have. We've had very little success with that, but we also live and operate out of Bolivia, which, you know, anyone who lives in a country like Bolivia and Latin America knows that, you know, the cost of living is a lot lower. This is more possible because we're here and not in Ecuador, or, you know, a country that utilizes the dollar, for example. So we're able to do a lot more with a lot less, but we do require that support on Patreon, which is the only way we're currently set up to receive support. And of course, we are delighted if you follow us on our social media at Kawsachun News.
Un abrazo, guys. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Bye-bye.
Thank you.